Be sure to watch my TED Talk on londonreal.tv. In London, technology is the Silicon Roundabout. Introducing a new talk show dedicated to the people of the London technology startup scene. Silicon Real. Each week, interviewing entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, financial technology, accelerators, and incubators in an exciting three-person format. Learn about the people behind the innovation. Locally filmed, locally sourced. Silicon Real. It's about the people. This is Silicon Real, the weekly talk show dedicated to the people of the London technology startup scene. I'm Brian Rose. I also host London Real. It's the same studio, a little bit different of a show. We've had guys like Tim Ferriss from the 4 Hour Everything. We had Neil deGrasse Tyson. We had local bad boy Ashley Walters in here last week, and it's a little bit different of a show, so check that out at londonreal.tv. But today we're here to talk tech. My co-host is entrepreneur Colin Pyle. You're rocking Crew Cafe. We just all had a double espresso of the good stuff. Kevin said great things about it. How's the coffee business?
Coffee business is going well. Yeah, things are going great. Again, going down to Italy in about 2 weeks to nail down a few more blends, and we're early days, so we're trying to streamline and create efficiencies in our supply chain and deal with multiple partners. But good, happy days. Another financing round, so I'm sure you know a few of those. Yeah, exhausting, but all good stuff.
Good. Where did you raise your money from?
Angels. So yeah, the first round was angels. Second round will just be angels again, and then hopefully we'll.
Are they in the coffee business, or are they venture or more tech investors?
Yeah, a little bit of both. Mostly friends and family. Yeah.
That's the trend back in the Valley. You have a lot of tech investors now investing in coffee and chocolate and all these other areas.
Interesting.
Fun business
going on tech. Well, I want to hear more about the Valley, so let me introduce our guest. It's Mr. Kevin Hartz, who is the founder and CEO of Eventbrite, which is the world's leading self-service ticketing platform, helping anyone to set up, promote, and then sell out any event. You guys have processed over 200 million tickets worth $2.5 billion. You guys have raised $200 million for yourself, valuing you guys, I think, over $1 billion for your company. You personally invested early in PayPal, Airbnb, Pinterest. Your wife, Julia, is a co-founder. We tried to get her. We got stuck with you. Kevin, welcome to Silicon Real. Thanks for being here.
Brian, thank you so much.
You just came in from San Francisco, right? I guess about a week ago. It's London Technology Week. It's crazy. There's like 200 different events.
Daily.
It is crazy. And I know your schedule has been I've been watching it on Twitter, and it's been pretty nuts. I know you're off to Campus London later. I was wondering, what does London feel like to you as far as technology-wise? Does it remind you of the Valley 10 years ago, or does it have a unique feel? Or I just wondered what your thoughts are when you land here and you start going around meeting people, things like that.
Well, physically, London is so steeped in tradition, and you come to this beautiful old city. And by the way, it's been a whirlwind in the last few days. We arrived on Sunday. It is, as I mentioned, so steeped in tradition, yet when you get out of the taxi or the Uber and you get into these events, it's the people. It's almost indistinguishable. I think entrepreneurs are universal, and entrepreneurs kind of migrate to these centers, and London is becoming one of these centers now.
That's kind of always good to hear. I kind of always wonder where we're at. People always say in fintech we kind of have an advantage because we're right in the middle of the banks are literally a mile away from us, and government's here. It's kind of like San Francisco, LA, New York rolled into one, in that sense. But I always wonder if it feels, kind of early on. Everyone's really helpful with everything we do at Silicon Real. They always want to help each other out. But we haven't had a lot of the big exits that people have had over the years. And I know you were involved in some of these early companies as an investor. And I was just wondering if it feels kind of like it's still kind of a secret that's moving up, or do you think it's maturing really fast here in London? Do you guys think about London when you're in San Francisco? Is it kind of what's going on in Europe?
Well, we think about London from a business perspective, from an Eventbrite perspective, because it's our third biggest city in the world from a matter of sales, and that's pretty incredible for a small company out in San Francisco, for Eventbrite to have that global nature to us. And we actually set up an office. We have a team out here in London and have been building that team we didn't proactively do that. We reactively did that because of the adoption of Eventbrite in London, and also because it's just a great pool of talent. You can draw upon the whole EU, and also we can launch into other markets from London as well.
I've got it on my phone. I've used Eventbrite like without knowing it, because a lot of events had it and they had the tickets, and so that's always a good sign when when my app is already on my phone before they get here. For people that don't know the story of Eventbrite, can you just walk us through kind of when it happened and how it happened? Your wife is kind of a co-founder, which I don't know if that happens a lot in San Francisco or anywhere else, but tell us about Eventbrite.
Well, we started in earnest in 2006, and there are three co-founders: myself, Julia, who also happens to be my wife, and Renaud Visage, who spends a lot of his time here in London. We basically broke all the startup rules, in the sense that at the time Julia and I were engaged to be married, and it's fairly insane to go into a business venture with your fiance, soon-to-be wife. And Renaud was, while he was a software engineer out in the Valley during the first dot-com bubble, he worked for a photo sharing site that was funded by Kleiner Perkins. That's how I first came in contact with him. He was spending most of his time in Paris, so we had a CTO that was based remotely for most of the year. So from a startup perspective, the three of us had kind of all the odds against us.
And is Silicon Valley littered with couples that have started companies up and then it went wrong? And I mean, it must be hard to keep founders even on the same page normally, but is that usually a recipe for disaster?
Well, couples, it can work brilliantly. It doesn't work most of the cases. And, what we had always in mind is that we didn't want to destroy a relationship. We are spending the rest of our lives together. And at the time we were starting Eventbrite, we were really thinking that, the worst thing we want to do is end up in some kind of conflict that destroys the relationship. So we always had this plan A or plan B, that one of us would step out of it if there was too much conflict. What happened is that there was just this serendipity, there was just a balance, a complementary nature that you find in founding partners that just worked very well. We divided and conquer is a term we often use, where we just don't overlap much in expertise, and she focuses in certain areas and I focus in others. And that is really the recipe for all great founding teams, or for founders, is to have that complementary expertise.
And you started just organizing local events in Silicon Valley. I mean, it was started off as kind of just a free service. Was that genesis?
Yeah, we launched as a very basic service that was based on PayPal only. PayPal really helped us get off the ground, a lot like you see Stripe today, the Irish brothers. We didn't spend our time rebuilding a payment system. We built a very basic system, but we really thought about low friction, is how can anybody sign up, publish an event, and start selling tickets in a matter of minutes. And in 2006, that was fairly unique. And we started it, we kind of hard started it by really speaking to our friends and colleagues in the industry and watching them and seeing how they use the product. So we built something that was scalable, but it had a really human element, in the sense that we were watching, helping, learning from them in the process.
And when did it start expanding to other cities, or started becoming paid for? When did you kind of see that kind of light?
Well, it's one of those classic tales where we had focused on tech conferences because it's what we knew, and they were great early adopters, and other tech conferences, mainly, blogs were exploding at the time and diversifying their businesses by starting to hold live events. And so other conferences started to pick the service up. So TechCrunch was one of our first, and many other blogs and conferences followed after that. And that's that initial vector of growth. But also at the time, we like to look at building business in terms of, what vectors do you grow off? What kind of drafts, tailwinds can you use to grow? And at the time, it was SEO. Google was really gaining prominence, and you were seeing a lot of companies grow through great organic search. And Yelp was an inspiration to us, what Jeremy Stoppelman had built in terms of indexing local businesses and seeing a lot of traffic coming from that way. And what started to happen after we kind of primed the pump and spent a lot of hard work watching the customer, working with the customer, getting this flywheel going, is that we saw Google search picking up this really interesting local content that started out as tech conferences, but then were classes on photography or dance or bands playing in small clubs and these sorts of things.
And was there a point where you felt it turning or tipping, or you were like, okay, this is kind of growing on its own?
Maybe I'm paranoid, but I always felt like we've always had to just be pushing and pushing and pushing. I don't think we ever, one may look back and, we're really proud of what we accomplished, but I think we've always been pushing the business. I think we've taken advantage of a lot of beneficial tailwinds, as we say, whether it was SEO, and then the social revolution happened, and all of a sudden we saw traffic coming from Facebook and more deeply integrated in Facebook, and people started sharing events, and that was a great vector. We we made free events. If you were holding an event that didn't cost anything, you can use our service at no cost. You've got this full featured platform, and today 2/3 of our events are free events, and tens of millions of people attend free events each year on Eventbrite, and they learn about Eventbrite, and they turn into paid sellers themselves, or many do. And so these natural drivers of growth, these virtuous cycles, all really helped kind of sweep us up. And I still always feel it's a good battle every day, and we're only as good as kind of the next adventure ahead of us. We probably should look back more and enjoy ourselves, but I think we're looking forward and really enjoying the challenges ahead.
Just out of curiosity, what was the spark or the idea for Eventbrite? Was it a pain that you had where, I'm tired of buying these tickets, or, you know what I mean? It's just that this all could be digital. When did that happen, and maybe who had the idea?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was really around, it feels like ticketing, and I use ticketing as a general term. I think that we connotate ticketing with the O2 Arena, Royal Albert Hall, the World Cup, but it's really something much broader. It's any type of live experience, and we saw this. We think it is this last bastion of e-commerce, this completely untapped area where people were putting up flyers or sending out emails or trying to promote, the so-called long tail of events. We saw this massive opportunity to be that solution. And really the heart of the vision is around live experiences, is that we love the notion of people gathering. It's inherent to who we are. It's part of, if you talk about Maslow's pyramids, it's one of those kind of core needs. And what we've seen is people coming together around live experiences, whether it's on the professional side, whether it's to see a band play, whether it's to watch a sporting event, whether it's to compete in a Tough Mudder race, which are these crazy obstacle courses started by...
I was on one about a month ago.
Ah, good for you.
Yeah.
How did you like it?
It was tough. That's what I told everyone afterwards. It was tough. I put together a video with my GoPro head cam, and everyone was like, that looks like fun, but I cut out the 4 hours of running up hills. And, but yeah, it was a fantastic experience, and yeah, it was all about being together, and there's no time limits, and I really like that. So.
And that's Will Dean created that. He's is he British. From London? Yeah, he's British. A Brit. He was British Special Forces and went over to Harvard Business School, when he left business school, started that, and it's just been one of these phenomenons of, I think that really typifies the live experience.
Yeah.
It's interesting you said that it's because we watch, we watch live streaming, and now you can stream concerts in HD, and we've got Skype calls, and we've got the social media revolution you talked about. And yet on the other side of that is this need for us all to connect and get together, which is the essence of your business model. And I was wondering how, do you see those kind of two battling in people's heads, or in people in tech spaces' heads, or us as humans going forward, or we have all these tools to connect virtually, but we really want to connect physically?
I really like how you said that. It feels like you're really plugging Eventbrite now. Thank you. I'm going to have to borrow that. Yeah. Luckily, this is being archived, so I can like transcribe this or something. But no, that's beautifully said. Is that as we become more connected, that in fact, technology has also enabled us to gather. That a mobile phone, given its characteristics, or social media, allows us to come together more easily and find out what's going on or what's happening around us. And that's really the vision of Eventbrite, is to bring people together and not miss those great experiences, or find new experiences that you wanted to be a part of. We see it as a media type. In the United States, we have cable TV with a few hundred channels, and you have your film, and you have your educational channels, and your sports, and so on. And we see kind of we want to be that cable TV of live experiences that cover every part of your life, whether it's professionally, whether you want to learn something new, or whether, again, you want to be challenged in sport, that you have this kind of channel guide to everything happening in the real world.
Yeah, so you look at it almost as a media platform.
Yes, exactly.
It's interesting how you look at things differently. It seems to be all the success stories out of, in technology, are people that just look at things differently. And people talk about this recent Uber valuation, and they say it's because the president is not thinking about this as a taxi company. He's thinking about it as a logistics solution. Right. And it's interesting, you talk about this being like almost a media vertical, getting together with people, whether it be for events or teaching or learning or something like that.
Well, it's one of the oldest media verticals around. The Greek right. Greek plays. Right. So we've gathered since almost the beginning of time, and it's time to really formalize that more, and that's really our mission. And so when we think about that, we think about, I guess there's Nielsen ratings or net ratings. If you have Nielsen ratings in the United States, but it's how much time you spend watching television or these different things. And we foresee a future where you have that share of time that is spent in these live experiences that's much more formalized. And today there's little bits and pieces of that. You go to you go see a band, you run in a race, but we really want to understand and define that more and provide more variety to consumers, because that's really what kind of defines us as human beings, that we can gather and connect and discover and learn and all these great things.
I think as a species, we're getting more and more frustrated because we think we've solved all of these things where you used to have to get together and go see a band live. And now you can watch the music video at home. You can watch a DVD when you get home from work and relax. Or you can do all these things where you communicate via Skype. And I talked to my dad, but I haven't seen him for 4 years, but I Skyped him last week. And I think we're ultimately, they're building this kind of human frustration because we're not getting out there. Like the Tough Mudder was probably one of the greatest things I'll do all year. And I was this big thing, and we prepared, and I did it. And we were all there touching and looking at each other and having these emotions and
shared experiences.
I don't do enough of that stuff. And I live in London, for God's sakes. So I don't know. I don't know why that is.
Yeah, I really sort of push against it, because even just running a business, I thought, you talk about the start of Eventbrite, which is kind of, ironic that here's this company that's bringing people together, but yet it was started with your CTO, not in the same location. And for me, starting businesses, if you've ever spent a month with, a developer not next to you or a designer not next to you, it can be hugely frustrating. And you think, until virtual reality, where you can kind of sit in a virtual room with someone and actually work together, I don't think Skype is, it's a great service. Don't get me wrong, I love it, but
we're seeing those challenges today as we expand and try to communicate or trying to maintain that communication with our London office. We've expanded in South America. We have an office in Argentina. a team down there, and it's very difficult, but very important given the global aspect
Sure.
of businesses today.
How many employees do you have globally?
We have 373.
Right on the money.
There we go.
It's weird because you see like an Oculus acquisition by Facebook, and it would seem like Kevin would just ring the guy, the portfolio manager, and be like, "Look, if you want a zero correlated asset, it's Eventbrite," because they're almost like the two separate issues, aren't they?
Right.
One is like you have to actually be there, and one is you have to actually not be there.
Right.
Does that come through your mind when you see a lot of that virtual reality technology, and you're thinking that's great to have the tech, but we know there's always going to be the need for the
I love the zero correlated asset. Another line I will use, but that's exactly right. Is we often say that we imagined a world, that we would be in, the Snow Crash. If you've read the novel Snow Crash, it's this science fiction novel where you of the future where you travel through inside of these virtual worlds through this Oculus type of interface, and that is what we all imagine the future to be. And I think there's this dichotomy of the online and the offline, and the offline will always remain robust. And to maybe take this at a different angle, what you see in the digital world is a lot of disruption. So you saw the disruption in the music industry, Sean Parker and Napster, and Sean Fanning, and the value of recorded music go to nearly zero. And what you saw was that the touring industry really took off, that artists then made their money going out on tour. And that analog works in so many different categories. We see so many different kind of traditional magazines that are building their business or expanding their business through having live events, whether it's around wine and food, or whether it's around certain hobbyists. And Makers Fair is something that comes to mind that was just in the Bay Area and is starting to tour more and more. But Makers Fair started from, it was really a publication, and now the Makers Fair themselves are these wonderful festivals that celebrate coming together and creating.
Do you have people like the traditional ticket people? Are they now becoming on your radar, or are you going on their radar as you get bigger and bigger? The ticket masters and the stub hubs and the people that have, I wouldn't say they're the music industry of the past. I didn't say that. But is that something that you have to consider now as you get bigger and bigger, that you're ultimately competing with these guys? Or is that now obvious to them?
Well, the incumbents, some incumbents are certainly kind of tied to the past and challenged. I think you've seen in most cases that incumbents, really have difficulty transitioning to a changing world, and history doesn't bode well. The previous company I co-founded, a company called Zoom, is a money transfer business, and Zoom went public last year. Can't claim I'm no longer operating that business. I'm running Eventbrite full time, but I remain on the board and have watched that business grow over 10 years to really put a dent in Western Union. And Western Union is one of these offline brands that's having this real challenge moving online because it's disrupting its own channel, how it does business. But I don't even need to use Western Union as an example of disruption in progress. We can look at Blockbuster, we can look at Barnes & Noble and so on.
And so those companies aren't necessarily ones you're targeting, but you're going after a similar market.
Well, our approach has been to, our vision is to encompass every live experience, and we aspire to be in that market, and we do serve a lot of music clients in a number of festivals. And however, it's a more competitive market, and what that means is that instead of kind of banging our heads against the wall and trying to break into the ultra competitive markets, what we're doing is we're expanding into all these different categories that range, again, from politics to classes to conferences to all these different geographies. Our growth in Europe, our growth in Latin America, we still need to make a push into Asia. We're just scratching the surface there. So we always say follow the path of least resistance, and I think that is a a lesson for startups. Disruption doesn't mean to take an incumbent head on, but there are many different paths to get there.
373 employees, 200 million raised. You started off with 3, now you're 373. If you have any advice to anyone who's kind of in a smaller level and is going to get to your level someday, what is the hardest part of running a company that big now? Is it communication? Like, you might have a vision, you don't look in the rearview mirror, obviously. How do you keep the whole company kind of looking forward without overdriving them?
It's really all in the Soylent Green punchline. It's the people, or is that? Do you get that reference? There's some film,
right? That's what it was made of.
Yes,
it was made of people.
Yes,
okay.
Right. but it is all about the people. I'm testing that. It's probably not a good line to use in the future.
Because they were eating themselves. That's our tagline on the Silicon Rail. It's about the people.
It's not in that way.
Not it's about eating the people.
We're a cannibalistic.
Well, there you go. Your tagline is more apropos. It's you build a great company. I think that it is critically important to focus around the product in building a great product and making your customers happy. But it's critically important, as important, to focus around the team you build. And so finding those right people for those right positions really is the key aspect to scaling. In the early days, and what most of the listeners coming from the startup side, when you're 3 or 5 or 10 people, it's you're working on everything. You're driving very hard. You're moving the business yourself. But as you scale, that's all really done by finding the talent that can actually do things better than you, that are more sharpened in certain areas, that can complement you, that can really help you scale. And that was the key to our growth at Eventbrite, was finding where our weak points are and finding great people to fill those roles. And that's the key to it. In the early days, it's most critically important to have it's that founding team. Do you have the right chemistry amongst the founding team? That Julia, Renaud, and I we're lucky that we'd come together and things worked, making sure that there's complementary expertise, that there's good chemistry, and in balance, that there's great trust, and that you can divide and conquer in your own way, and that you can each go out there and have an impact. I like building startups in more of a bootstrapping fashion. I'm not a fan of going out and raising a lot of money initially. I like to prove a market, and especially with the market and with the kind of world, the way it's evolved, that you have so much open source software available, you have so many resources available to help get a company started and into orbit without a lot of capital. That's really kind of the test, is you should be able to get a product live, get customers, even perhaps get to revenue, and each one of those steps reduces the risk to business success.
Is it hard to find talent in San Francisco when you're like, I need to hire 10 people? I don't know what the job market's like. Is it nearly impossible? And if you can find people, is it about the money? Is it about the stock options? Or is it about the vision?
The slides in the offices.
Yeah, it's very challenging in San Francisco, and we often use the analogy of customer acquisition on the marketing side, that you need to find unique channels to discover great people, that you can't use the typical channels. The kind of great example is that people used to just find an engineer on Craigslist or post to Craigslist. Right. That's played out. That's arbitrage is gone. So how do you reach out and find talent around the world, or pull from universities, or acqui-hires, or how do you go about approaching finding great talent and retaining great talent is as important as finding customers and making those customers happy. Building a great company, having those people in place, builds a timeless company that any product you build or launch will be successful with those right people.
Europe, when you look at Europe from where you're based in California, is it, and when other people like your peers in San Francisco look at Europe, is it like really hard to get your head around all the languages and all the different markets? We got Germany you have to be in, but you have to be there in German, and England seems like kind of easier because it's the same language. Does it look like a mess to you, or does it just look like a wonderful opportunity to kind of test your product and find different ways of doing it better?
We've been looking at it for a number of years now, and so I would say we're still in the early stages of understanding, but we've come quite far. A lot of our investors, Tiger Global is one of our investors that really has an international focus. Sequoia Capital has a global focus, and that's been helpful to get that perspective that the internet industry is not just about Silicon Valley and winning the United States. That used to be the old paradigm 10 years ago, is that you had to win domestically, and nearly from day one you've got to think globally. And the UK market, Ireland, we've just really launched in Ireland recently and seen great growth there, and then now pushing into the continent, really amazing markets and ones that we have to appreciate and grow on their own with their own leadership.
Would you ever move to London?
I spent a year in graduate school outside of London.
Oxford. That was strange. You went to Stanford, and then you went to Oxford for a history degree.
That's right.
That's quite a...
Not so apropos for technology, one would think, but I would say I'm the kind of key component of history is that you see these patterns that happen over and over again. And we see these patterns in tech happening over and over again. So that's maybe my one tie to how history is actually applicable. Otherwise, the period of George III doesn't hold a lot of weight in the Valley, expertise in that area.
So it has been useful, that history degree?
I would say that the kind of intellectual curiosity and pattern recognition are the really of what I took away from Oxford. Okay.
Speaking of history, I mean, we've seen, big bull markets in tech, and we've seen them recede, whatever you want to call those things. We've seen, a recent very bull market. We've seen these Uber valuations, which are very impressive or crazy, whatever you want to call it, raising 9 figures for Uber at $17 billion valuations. Do you see patterns here? I mean, you've been in the Valley for a while. You probably saw the 2001, 2002, and you've seen it again. Does this feel different? Does it feel like a slower growth, a sustainable growth, or do you still say I can pick 2 out of these 10 companies, they're not going to be here in 5 years?
Well, I think you answered the question. There are these really clear patterns that happen. We saw it in 2000. We see these pendulum shifts, and you describe it as the pendulum of capitalism never stays still in the middle. It's either boom, it swings out one direction, or bust and swings the other. We're a little bit out on the boom side, but you can never really tell how far it goes or how long it lasts. We're in there seems to be a fair amount of health. I mean, despite we're seeing some big valuations and so on, but you're also seeing some remarkable numbers and some remarkable economics out of these companies that I'm not going to say this is different from last time. As soon as that's the most dangerous line I've ever heard. Right. We heard that in 2008. We're hearing it now, and usually as soon as you start to hear people saying it's different this time, it means the end is near. But what's wonderful is that there is a greater capital efficiency to the businesses being built. I love studying and really looking at these marketplace businesses. Uber, Airbnb, Eventbrite is a marketplace of buyers and sellers, attendees and organizers. Our center of gravity has been really focused around the organizers, and where we're shifting and spending our focus now is around the attendees and consumers, and filling that vision of finding great things to do. I dodged your question a bit about whether we're in a bubble. How did I get away with that?
I don't know, but I
shifted it right back to
I expected
Eventbrite.
nothing less.
I'll bring it. When I think about the pendulum, because I've spent a lot of time traveling, especially China and India, and almost 2 billion people, right?
Right.
But it's like, I think the pendulum's swinging, but also the pendulum itself is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So I think you can see all of these massive valuations, and I don't think they're as crazy as people think, because 1 billion people are going to come online in the next X years. And I think really Asia and India, some few companies from the West have actually really tapped, right? You said you're just scratching the surface in Asia, which is, a good chunk of the world. And it's just so,
Yeah.
I think when you look at valuations, it's like, can this team tackle Asia? Can this team, do something in China and India? And if that answer is yes, then a lot of these valuations, I think, actually make sense.
And you look at the numbers, I mean, like Kevin was saying, if you look at the numbers that were leaked about Uber, I mean, this is real money
Right.
changing hands between that. It's like diversified revenue streams in cities all around the world between all these different users. Same with Airbnb. I'm guessing the same with Eventbrite. So it's like, it's hard to necessarily ignore these kind of numbers. Were you alluding to that?
I am, and I think there are some real businesses. There are, of course, in all the excitement and some businesses that either get funded too early or maybe didn't have the sustainability, end up kind of caught up and trapped in these overfunding situations or overexpand, and so you want to see a healthy pruning of the industry, and the NASDAQ went through that a couple months ago. There are a number of companies that really lost a tremendous amount of their value, but the best companies, we know over time there tends to be this consolidation, and the few winners in each, and usually one winner in each category exists, and it looks like that'll be the Uber. In that space, the Airbnb. I'm of course biased here, but that's how markets operate.
Right. So it's good to see a bit of that coming off and pruning, that kind of thing.
Yes.
Is it true you have a Pets.com stuffed animal in your office?
Wow, that's exactly right. I do, and that's the reminder. That's thou art mortal, is not to get too overconfident. And I look at that Pets.com sock puppet, which became the kind of what do you call it, the metaphor for the craziness of the of the late 90s.
Were you involved in that company at all, or you just keep it around?
I wasn't. I had a office down the street, or actually I lived down the street from the Pets.com office, and always, that was like the sign of the times there. But I keep that sock puppet on my desk to remind me that not to get too ahead of ourselves, not to get too overconfident, to really think about building a great business.
Apparently, your wife has tried to throw it away a few times, and you won't let her.
Absolutely not.
I remember that mania. I was in '99 at a .com startup. It was an e-commerce one, and I remember the different iterations of Pets.com. There were 4 or 5 that were selling all those supplies, and I guess it is the epitome of that bubble.
The question at that time for that industry of pet e-commerce companies was whether you ship dog food or not, because dog food was so, the shipping costs, that was the great question. And then of course Amazon, I think, has solved that in one way or another.
Right. Do you watch the television show Silicon Valley, and is it accurate?
I have not seen it yet.
Okay, I'm a little obsessed with it.
Yes, I really want to see it. Okay. There's so much buzz around it, and I've not gotten around. I think has HBO released it to iTunes yet?
I should know that because I watched it legally. So I don't know. There's been 8 shows in the series. I'm not sure if they have released it. I was pretty impressed.
Is it on Netflix or no?
I don't know.
It's not on Netflix.
Not yet.
HBO and Netflix are warring, and we are not HBO subscribers. So, I have to find it digitally, and if it's not available digitally,
yeah, why would you?
I can't see it.
I'm always just trying to get a feel for what what San Francisco's like, and what the feeling is there, and whether it is madness and mania around the tech, or is. I know there's been a lot of criticism as far as the normal everyday person in San Francisco versus the tech kind of person. Does it feel like a 2-class system? People used to say in New York City in the 90s, where I lived, that if you weren't in banking, you were a second-class citizen, and they were probably right. I was in banking at the time, but. Is that the case in San Francisco? Is it that much of a divide, or is it overblown?
Well, it's really a renaissance period in San Francisco, and we hope that the rising tide raises all boats, and that you see this flourishing businesses, that are part of the ecosystem of tech, growing, all the different retailers, the different service providers, the city, the real estate. The city is undergoing this wonderful renaissance. However, to the flip side of it, it's not a simple equation. That the rents are astronomical. There is a fair amount of unhealthy materialism, in my opinion, and I think that the Valley does need to think about the other side of the equation, and that's the simple fact of it. In any of these great periods of prosperity, these type of divisions occur, and we're right in the midst of trying to contend with it. And what you see are these issues, or powder kegs arise around attacking buses and things like that.
What have you seen in London this week that impresses you? Has there been any kind of sector or companies or anything that you're like, it's interesting to see what these people are doing? Because in a weird way, you kind of put these people in a different time zone, 8 time zones away, and they're obviously going to come up with slightly different things than people in New York or San Francisco. I was wondering if anything kind of stuck in your mind.
Well, it's, as I've traveled around the city, I've just gone from startup to startup, and going into these offices and seeing 15 companies on the placard of cool startups, and sitting down with these entrepreneurs and speaking to them, and seeing the sophistication, the intelligence, the drive, the things that you want to see in a growing tech community. Now, Silicon Valley has had a decade's head start. We had
2 decades,
many decades actually. The chip industry, Hewlett Packard, the military influence and impact that spawned the chip industry, which spawned the hardware industry, which spawned the software industry. So there's been a lot of time for what's happened in the last 2 decades to actually develop, and so. I think that London is on its way. It's following more of a course of I would say New York. We're seeing a lot of promise and excitement coming out of New York. So it's following more of that. Whereas if I think about the exciting things that are happening in India, in China, you have a lot of Indians, a lot of Chinese going back to India and China to start companies, and that's because they're self-contained markets, and they're so enormous. The Alibabas and Flipkarts and so on of the world, and they're just great opportunities back there. London is different, and I would put it more akin to New York, if I try to make that comparison.
All right, that's a good comparison. Can you spot a successful entrepreneur in 5 minutes? If you sit down and talk to someone, you said you've been going through these companies.
I think it's sometimes, I guess that's my cop out, and I think just
I bet
enough.
You can.
I can certainly, I certainly look for certain characteristics, and I actually like to learn a lot about family history, background. I like to hear the obstacles that entrepreneurs have overcome, and so I almost run a psychological profile on entrepreneurs to say what is their true motivation, what was their, how were they influenced by their family and their parents, as it really tells me a lot about an entrepreneur and their true motivations. But I've certainly made my fair share of mistakes. I think that, you mentioned all those great companies that I had the good fortune to be involved in, but I think a great investor is just somebody that's managed to push aside or convince everyone to forget about all the disasters he or she has been involved in.
That's good advice. How do you get involved on the ground floor with those companies like PayPal, Airbnb, Pinterest, or is there another 97 in your portfolio that didn't do very well, or how is that because people you knew or you believed in their business models? How did that happen?
Well, it was a fledgling time in the Valley that I was really out there, and again, see that in London today is that it was a special movement that was happening, and there weren't 15 or 20 Airbnbs. There was just one. There weren't 15 or 20 Trulias. There was one PayPal, and it was a relatively small network. And I was an entrepreneur. We were, and what I found is that I was just drawn to learning. Part of really the context, or really the main thrust of Eventbrite, we value transparency, we value collaboration, and we value learning. And I could learn a lot of the early stages by spending time with these great entrepreneurs. And so they were investments that I was supposed to be advising and helping, but in fact I was gaining as much information the other way. And that's really what the core is of what it takes to build a collaborative fledgling industry, and that's what needs to really happen with entrepreneurs in London. And that's what's heartening to see when entrepreneurs are all housed together and sharing problems. We talk a lot about open source software, but we should talk about open source sharing of knowledge. And that's what was helpful, was these formative years of being able to interact with all these great entrepreneurs.
That is probably the best statement you made so far. It's just the most interesting. It feels like a really open community here, but I don't really have anything to compare it to. But I haven't heard of anyone trying to hide an idea or hide knowledge. Everybody is more than happy to give introductions, and they've taught me to be the same. And it's just like, let's help. We still feel like a movement that's foreign to this city. But we're not in government. We're not in banking. We're not in advertising.
I kind of span the tech world, and then with my coffee business, the old traditional product business,
right,
and I see it enormous gaps, right? Like the lack of transparency and the shadiness that exists in sort of the coffee industry of sort of the moving products is incredible.
And the hesitancy to give introductions and
exactly. And I'm trying to take the tech world and be transparent and open, and then guys are screwing me over, and I'm like, what the fuck? I'm trying to pull it, be tech here with you, and you didn't play tech, and that's not fair.
It occasionally happens in tech, but it's harder to do because it's an open, transparent community, and you don't, if you act as a bad character, the reputation sticks with that entrepreneur for a long time.
Right, and
investors as well.
Yeah, and it's not just the bad relationship you have with the person. It's like everyone sees your behavior, like a true monkey clan, and you get punished for it. Kevin, we always ask everyone here a few questions at the end. I want to ask you the same. If you could make a phone call to the 20-year-old Kevin Hartz and give that young man a bit of advice, what would you tell him to do?
Well, my advice, to any 20-year-old or fledgling entrepreneur is to not listen to their parents. And what that means, I like to give my parents a hard time and tease them, so that's why I like to say that, for one. But secondly, the truth of it is that our parents, or the status quo, is not thinking about what the future looks like. One is thinking about what the past looked like, what success looked like in the past, and that was being an investment banker, or being a consultant, or taking a risk-averse route to so-called success or happiness. And the reality is that you have to take extreme risk, and especially at an age of 20, it's a time to take some risks, really try to make an impact on the world, and do something really incredible. And that's what we wake up every day. That's what motivates me, is and so thinking big, taking big risks, really going for it is that phone call to that 20-year-old.
And that 20-year-old being you, were you taking those risks at that point?
I think I was. I think I zigzagged a bit, and but no, I could have. I certainly could have been thinking bigger. Was certainly not on any track of a Mark Zuckerberg. I would call myself a late bloomer. having started my first company in my mid-late 20s.
And when you were at Oxford, you weren't thinking, I'm just going to get back to tech pretty soon here, or I'm going into tech.
I was thinking graduate school, no, more graduate school, or
doctorate.
Who knows what.
Okay. On that same line, best advice you've ever received, business or personal, over the course of your career?
Best advice I've ever received: surround yourself by great people. It's something often heard, but really just not compromising on the quality of the team that you're going to build around you, and at the same point, finding great mentors to get advice. If you're a startup out there, startup here in London, it's hard to hire employees, or you may not have the capital to do it, but you can find great mentors and people to learn and get advice from.
Excellent. Last bit of that, you mentioned to the 20-year-olds advice and things like that. If they do want to get into tech and they're not located in a major metropolitan area where they can maybe drop by for a drink about it, that kind of thing, what should they do? Should they try to build something? Is there any key thing that they can do if they want to get into the industry?
Well, it's incredible, the body of knowledge available and resources available, such as this show, that anyone from around the world can listen in and gain hopefully some insights. And then it's also, you can learn to code online, you can take classes from MIT on computer science. So there's so much that can be done now, and really listening, learning, and just making that jump. If there's always the opportunity to, in the 20s, to make a lot of mistakes, and if it's an interest and a passion, go for it. The downside, or the thing to be cautious of, is just make sure, I think that technology can be somewhat fashionable, and it's like it comes and goes sometimes, and entrepreneurs can get into it for the wrong reasons, can get into it for that they see piles of money, or it seems to be the in vogue thing to do. And really what entrepreneurialism is about is making an impact on the world in a positive way. And, if you see that as your true north, and then follow it.
Very well said.
Good.
Take
Good.
some risks. That's good advice for the 20-year-old.
Good. I have one more question. You have such a unique background for payments. Do you know what I mean? I think, I want to hear your opinion on where are payments going. Is Bitcoin here to stay? Maybe shed some light on some of that stuff.
Well, I'm biased again. I'm long in Bitcoin, and did get involved in payments early on as a spectator on the sidelines of watching PayPal grow and that great team do amazing things as that company was started, and then of course Zoom and now Eventbrite is very payments heavy. So looking very carefully at the world of payments, and certainly watching Bitcoin, I think that I think optionality is important. So by that I mean that I believe that Bitcoin has that opportunity to be the TCP/IP of money, meaning to be this new form of currency that becomes ubiquitous. But there's also a lot of risk to it, and so you don't want to necessarily put all your eggs in one basket. So that's the question is, and that's the question of the challenges Eventbrite every day is there are things that can disrupt or propel Eventbrite to the next level. Google search, organic search was one of those things that propelled us to the next level. Social and Facebook and Twitter was something that propelled us to the next level. The mobile revolution is now, and we have to decide, will Bitcoin be that, or will it end up being something forgotten of the past? And I'm long in Bitcoin, but I also can't. I would say it's a small part of my portfolio, so I'm hedging myself.
So keep your options open.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love Bitcoin. I'm fascinated by it. I'm not that long. I have a slightly small long position, but I'm not convinced it's going to change this whole payment game in the next 5 years, and maybe in the next 10. But that's my opinion. Not that you even asked my opinion.
That's okay. I'm glad to hear it.
Kevin, thanks so much for your time.
Thank
this
you.
was a great episode because we really got in your head about a lot of things. So thanks for the insights. We've been doing this now a year, 52 episodes, and it's great to kind of get the stories, and especially someone that's been in the industry as long as you, just to get your thoughts on there.
Well, really a pleasure. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Colin.
Yeah, thanks for making the stop on your busy week in London.
Yeah, well, if you're listening to us on iTunes, you can watch us on YouTube. And as we say, it's a Silicon Reel. It's about the people. We're 1 year in. We're going to keep doing this. Thank you. Happy birthday to you too. And if you want to help or get involved, send us an email, hello@siliconreel.com. We got a couple people that are working for us, getting involved, meeting all sorts of great people. And we always want to hear your suggestions for guests. And there you go. Kevin, all the best in your journeys and with Eventbrite. Big fan of what you're doing, and take care of yourself.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
We have people pair up between some of the startups that we work with and some of the established people that we have within the business. And it's about sharing best practice and mind share and all of that sort of stuff. And it really rubs off on them. It really rubs off on them in terms of some of the ideas that they can come back with and the different ways in which they approach challenges. If you're going to grow, if you're going to be successful, you need to take risk. When you get that call, when you get that opportunity, just go for it. Don't worry. Consistently push yourself outside your boundaries. So there's a world of possibilities out there. So I think it's a really exciting time.